So you sent over that Guardian piece, "The Rise of End Times Fascism" by Naomi Klein and Astor Taylor. Really, quite something.
It is definitely thought-provoking, maybe a little alarming, too.
Absolutely. So for this deep dive, I thought we should really try and unpack what they're getting at. What is this end times fascism they're talking about?
Yeah.
And they focus specifically on the far right in the U.S.
Right. And what struck me is how they connect things you wouldn't normally, well, put together. These different groups and ideas sort of weaving this unexpected narrative.
Exactly.
Oh.
Okay, so let's get into it. They start off looking at this whole push for like corporate city-states and freedom cities. Guys like Peter Thiel, Mark Andreessen championing these ideas.
Yeah, places like Prospera or that whole seasteading thing, building cities on the ocean. It's all about this philosophy of exit, right? Getting away from civic duty, taxes, regulations.
Leaving the rest of us behind, essentially.
Pretty much. A desire to detach, create their own rules.
But then, here's the twist. They connect this to Donald Trump's 2023 proposal. Remember that? For freedom cities, but on federal land. It felt a bit random then.
It did, but Klein and Taylor suggest these corporate secession types were actually lobbying for it. They mentioned Trey Goff from Prospera getting really excited about potential D.C. legislation.
Wow. So you've got the ultra-libertarian tech money guys and a nationalist figure like Trump suddenly finding common ground.
That's the convergence they're pointing to, how these, fringe ideas can bubble up into mainstream politics. It's kind of fascinating and maybe a bit worrying.
And it ties into this other idea. They talk about these fortress escape pods for the super wealthy. Like they're prepping for disaster, shocks, scarcity, societal collapse, building bunkers, basically.
Yeah, high-tech, self-sufficient hideaways. They're actively playing for things to fall apart, which, makes you wonder if they're helping cause the future they fear by disinvesting from the present.
Good point. But then they contrast that elite escape plan with what they call a mass market vision of fortress nations. This is more what we see playing out politically, isn't it?
Totally. In the U.S., other places too. It's less about private islands, more about hardening national borders, kicking out populations deemed unwanted.
They bring up Man's Island, Guantanamo Bay.
Yeah.
These awful examples of offshore holding pens.
Exactly. Extra-national penal colonies. So if you connect the dots, the elite escape pods and the fortified nations, it's the same underlying urge, isn't it?
Separation and security.
Yeah, in a world they see as dangerous. For the rich, it's physical separation. For the nationalists, it's territorial demographic exclusion. It's all a bunker mentality, just different scales.
Okay, so here's where they really make their case. They argue this isn't just typical right-wing politics. It's a uniquely powerful apocalyptic strain in government.
Right, and they link it quite directly to Christian fundamentalist ideas about the rapture. The belief that a select few get saved, whisked away, while everyone else faces the apocalypse.
That's a really key connection they're drawing. This end times thinking. It gives a powerful framework, doesn't it?
It really does. The idea of a chosen group being saved while others are left behind, it can justify both the elite escape plan and the nationalist purification project. It gives it a sort of divine permission slip.
And they name names. People linked to the Trump administration with ties to Christian Zionism or nationalism. Mike Huckabee, Pete Hegseth, Kristi Noem, Russell Vought, who's big in Project 2025.
Yeah, it shows how these, deeply held religious beliefs might actually be shaping policy, especially their view of world events. Like in the Middle East, it's not just personal faith.
And it's not only religious, which I found really interesting. They mentioned Peter Thiel, again, not exactly known for being devout, apparently speculating about the Antichrist.
And landing on Greta Thunberg.
Right. Which is wild, but it shows how this kind of apocalyptic framing isn't limited to religious fundamentalists.
Thiel's comment, maybe it's provocative, but it suggests this broader anxiety, this fear of any getting in the way of his vision of, tech progress or whatever.
The article talks about a secular rapture, too. Within this thing they call the accelerationist imaginary.
Which is basically the idea that societal collapse could be a good thing, a catalyst for radical change.
So secular figures are also talking about escaping to arcs, bunkers, and gated freedom cities. They mentioned a paper left behind about this future fetishism.
And this is where someone like Elon Musk fits in, according to the authors. His whole Mars colonization project.
The secular arc.
Exactly, a way for a select few to maybe escape whatever happens here on Earth.
But then Kim Stanley Robinson.
Yeah.
The sci-fi author whose Mars books apparently inspired Musk, he calls it a moral hazard.
Yeah, Robinson's point is crucial. It's like this fantasy of escape makes it easier to trash this planet, thinking there's a plan B. It distracts from fixing things here now.
Right. Okay, so this bunker idea isn't just for billionaires. How does it filter down? They point to Steve Bannon.
Ah, Bannon. Yeah, his role seems to be translating this doom narrative for the masses. His podcast is apparently just constant talk of impending disaster, the final battle.
And selling prepper gear on the side. Birch Gold, my Patriot supply.
Right. Create the fear, sell the solution, individual preparedness, because the end is nigh. It fits perfectly.
And so in that worldview, the U.S. itself has to become the bunker. Harder borders, mass deportations. They even mention using the Alien Enemies Act to send Venezuelan migrants to that mega prison in El Salvador, CICOT.
Which is just, yeah. It's the national level bunker mentality made terrifyingly real. Focus on exclusion, punishment, defining enemies within and without, protecting the bunker at all costs.
They mentioned Trump praising CICOT in that quote from Todd Lyons at ICE,
Right.
comparing deportations to Amazon Prime, but with human beings.
Ugh, it just shows the dehumanization involved. People become commodities, logistics problems, no empathy.
And this leads to what they call national level supersize prepping, not just building walls, but acquiring resources. Panama's Canal, Greenland's shipping routes, minerals in Ukraine, Canada's water.
It's framed as survivalism, right? Not old school imperialism, but securing stuff the bunker nation needs for the collapse they see coming. Stockpiling for a scarce future.
And then they bring in J.D. Vance, using this old medieval Christian idea, or amoris, the order of love.
Right, the idea that you naturally love your family first, then community, then nation. But it's used to justify basically ignoring everyone outside the bunker.
It gives a sort of philosophical cover for prioritizing the in-group for, well, exclusion, a hierarchy of who deserves care.
Exactly.
So Klein and Taylor argue this whole thing, it's not just neoliberalism or neoconservatism as we knew them.
Yeah.
They call it money-worshipping millenarian mashup.
Yeah, a mashup, fusing tech dreams or maybe nightmares with religious end-time stuff and this absolute faith in, like, unchecked capitalism. They even coin a term, theobros.
Theobros, okay. And they say economic stress, divisive messages, that's what makes people vulnerable to this.
Well, yeah, if you feel insecure, like things are out of control, maybe this promise of belonging inside a protected bunker, even if it means shutting others out, starts to sound appealing. Uncertainty breeds attraction to certainty, even harsh certainty.
It's that phrase they use, darkly festive fatalism. Like they almost welcome the destruction because it clears the way for their vision and proves them right.
There's definitely a grim satisfaction element described, like the decline of the other validates their whole worldview. The old order has to burn for their new one to rise.
And things like the Trump administration undermining public safety nets, that actually feeds into it, makes people feel they have to prep, have to rely on themselves, opens the door for privatization.
Precisely. If the state pulls back or is perceived as failing, it creates a vacuum. And that vacuum can be filled by private solutions, reinforcing that whole individualist bunker ethos.
They loop back to the super-rich preppers here. Those reports about bunkers in Silicon Valley, Wall Street, escape homes in Hawaii, like Zuckerberg's, or Thiel trying to build one in New Zealand.
It just hammers home that this isn't abstract. Real money, real resources are going into these escape plans.
And they connect this prepping to Silicon Valley's intellectual fads, transhumanism, effective altruism, long-termism. The authors seem worried about the biases there, right? Prioritizing some hypothetical far future over people suffering now.
Yeah, they raise serious questions like who decides what long-termism looks like? And does focusing on saving humanity trillions of years from now mean we ignore immediate crises like poverty or climate change?
They throw in other related ideas too. Effective accelerationism, neo-reactionary thought, pronatalism, and then bam, they connect it to first-wave eugenics.
That's a really stark comparison.
It is. It's chilling. Comparing these modern tech utopian or nationalist ideas to the eugenics movement of the early 20th century, who gets to decide who's fit to survive or reproduce?
It really highlights the danger in any ideology that starts dividing people into worthy and unworthy, insiders and outsiders, a very dark historical echo.
And the authors pinpoint three big things accelerating all this. The climate crisis, obviously.
Makes elites feel vulnerable, maybe. Their coastal properties.
Yeah. Then COVID-19, the pandemic.
Yeah.
The age of consequences, they call it.
Definitely shook everyone's sense of stability.
And third, the super fast advance of AI. bringing all those sci-fi fears to life.
Right. These massive overlapping crises just feed the anxiety, the uncertainty, makes people grasp for radical answers, whether it's individual prepping or this kind of authoritarian exclusionary politics.
They quote Richard Seymour, "The apocalypse is no mere fantasy. We are living in it," really hits home.
It frames it not as some distant threat, but as something unfolding now, driven by real-world crises.
And then they look at a potential Trump 2.0 economic plan, prioritizing fossil fuels, weapons, crypto, AI, the very things driving some of these crises or enabling the escape fantasies.
It's a huge potential contradiction, isn't it? Talking about preparing for the end while doubling down on the industries that might be accelerating it.
Eric Schmidt admitting AI could triple energy needs, likely using fossil fuels. It's staggering.
The sheer resource cost of some of these tech ambitions is immense, and it raises big questions about priorities.
And underlying it all seems to be this intense fear of regulation. Maybe for these guys, the real apocalypse isn't climate change. It's being told no.
That seems to be a core driver. Protecting profits, resisting any limits, even if it means exacerbating the very problems fueling the whole end times narrative.
The article also tracks this shift away from altruism in parts of Silicon Valley. Zuckerberg talking about aggression, Palantir's Alex Karp dismissing self-flagellation, Musk calling empathy a weakness.
And Musk viewing humanity as just a biological bootloader for AI.
Yeah, he paints a picture of, well, a pretty bleak view of human value emerging from some corners of the tech world, a detachment from humanistic concerns.
A focus on tech progress above all else, maybe even above humanity itself.
They mention that movement in Spain, "Tu nube seca mi rio," your cloud dries my river. People pushing back against the massive water use of data centers.
It shows there is resistance. People are noticing the real-world costs of this unchecked tech expansion.
And then back to J.D. Vance on his trip to Europe, downplaying AI safety fears, but fiercely defending free speech, even for, like, Nazi content online.
And his comparison of Greta Thunberg and Elon Musk, really telling.
Very telling. Prioritizing Musk's tech disruption over Thunberg's climate warnings, it shows the values, right?
It clearly lays out a certain worldview. Yeah, unfettered tech, unfettered speech seems to be the priority.
And Thiel calling Thunberg the Antichrist because she represents regulation and higher taxes. It just ties it all together.
Exactly. She stands for collective action, planetary limits. That's the ultimate threat to their vision of individual escape and endless unregulated growth.
And that final perspective from Ani, linking wanting the planet to burn with denying bodily autonomy, like it's all part of an escape from Mother, escaping life's messy interconnectedness.
That's such a deep, powerful insight, connecting environmental destruction to controlling bodies, suggesting it comes from the same root desire to dominate, to escape dependency.
So wrapping it all up, the core message seems to be, we're up against an ideology that has basically just given up on a livable, shared world for everyone.
That's the heart of it, I think, this profound pessimism about our collective future, leading to this focus on saving only the self or the chosen few. Damn the consequences for everyone else.
And Klein and Taylor's response is a call for, well, the opposite, a counterstory focused on collective survival, on interdependence, belonging, striving for better times, not just bracing for end times.
Yeah, they stress the need for a different narrative, one based on solidarity, shared responsibility for the planet, for each other. It's about hope versus fatalism.
They brought up that concept Doi Cape from the Jewish Socialist Labor Bund, fighting for dignity and freedom right here where you are.
It's a great historical counterpoint, isn't it? Resisting displacement, building community, fighting for your place, the absolute opposite of the escape fantasy.
And they argue we need a kind of modern, universal version of that. Global solidarity, respect for the planet, all its people.
A doikite for the whole Earth, maybe. Recognizing we're all interconnected, all responsible, moving past narrow nationalism.
There's that quote from Robin Maynard. In order to make earthly planetary survival possible, some versions of this world need to end.
Powerful. It means letting go of the unsustainable, the unjust systems that are driving us towards the brink. We can't keep doing things the same way.
And that call from Adrienne Murray Brown and Autumn Brown to saying, come this way and we will figure out the rest. It feels hopeful, inviting.
It really does. It's about building unity around the basic desire to live, to survive together, even if we don't have all the answers yet. Just start moving together.
And that very last line, Anandi's question again. Had you stopped to consider that this might have been her best idea, talking about this world now?
It just forces you to pause, right? To appreciate what we have right here, instead of dreaming of escape or predicting doom, the value of the present.
Wow. Okay. Well, this deep dive certainly gave us, and hopefully everyone listening, a lot to process. That article really is a framework for thinking about some uh, pretty worrying currents.
Definitely. It connects dots in a way that feels important right now.
For you, our listener, we hope this has been insightful, maybe a starting point for exploring these really complex, urgent